glad people came out to protest.
At a time when our democracy is at risk, we need to make sure that we have an informed electorate.
It's also about our neighborhoods, our communities, and MyMC Media really focuses on what's happening here.
Hello, and welcome to Speak Up, Speak Out, a community discussion on free speech hosted by Montgomery Community Media. My name is Jasmine White, CEO of Montgomery Community Media, and I am your host for this important conversation. In celebration of community media and free speech, today we will speak with Montgomery County leaders who bring a wealth of knowledge and diverse perspectives to this topic. First, we have with us Montgomery County Council President Evan Glass, a tireless advocate for our community who has been instrumental in promoting freedom of expression and speech in the county. Council President Glass also worked as a journalist at CNN for many years, so he brings a unique perspective to this topic today. Next, we have Ari Brooks, the Executive Director of Friends of the Library, Montgomery County, a vital institution that plays a crucial role in fostering open dialogue and access to information within our county by advocating for our library system. Lastly, joining us is Mike Wassenaar, the President and CEO of the Alliance for Community Media, a national organization dedicated to ensuring voices from all corners of our diverse communities are heard. Together, we will explore the multifaceted nature of free speech, the challenges it faces in our modern world, and its role in shaping our community. It's important to remember that freedom of speech is not just a legal concept, but a cornerstone of our society and democracy. It helps us understand and navigate complex issues from different perspectives and build a better future together. Thank you to our panel for being here. So I'm really excited about having this discussion today, so let's get started. Before we start today, I have a bit of a show and tell item. So this is my very own copy of the Constitution of the United States of America and Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. So I wanted to start this conversation by reading the First Amendment to the Bill of Rights and then getting some feedback from you on your reaction to that. So it says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So I want to focus about that, the second piece. So prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press. So I want to start with you, Ari, and just getting your reaction to hearing that. As a woman of color, when I read this and I think about the context of when it was written and how so many things have changed over the past 232 years, what is your reaction to that? Do you know what that means today and how things have changed over the course of that over 200 years?
I traveled internationally this summer, and never more was I proud to be an American. And when I hear that and it's applicable to me, it is such a, it's music to my ears that actually is applicable to me today in this context. And also to be in a position to support an institution like libraries, which allows us to exercise that freedom of the intellectual freedom under the umbrella of freedom of speech and freedom of having access to free information.
Sure, thank you. Mike, what's your reaction to hearing it?
So, I mean, to sort of dovetail with what Ari just spoke to, I think a little bit about, you know, the act of freedom as opposed to, you know, the thing of freedom. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer that freedom is something that's built and protected and actively cultivated in our communities, and as opposed to something that is defined by what it's not. Right? And very often, you know, when we talk about the Constitution, so I think about like community media centers, libraries, other public institutions that are meant for all. Those are some things that have to be sort of built and cultivated and protected so that we protect the rights of our neighbors. And we protect the opinions that people have that are theirs, not mine, right? So those are the things I think about. It's like that positive cultivation that's necessary so that freedom can thrive.
Right. Council President Glass.
The First Amendment is the cornerstone of our democracy. There's a reason it's the First Amendment, the most important, at the top, and it is to enable us to share our voices, share our concerns. Everything that we are working towards right now, protecting our democracy and our values, is really manifest in that First Amendment, making sure that everyone can share their thoughts, and I will say peacefully share their thoughts, and do so because as we see events happening all around the world, we can disagree, but hopefully we will do so disagreeable, but we fundamentally need that right to voice our thoughts.
I'm glad you brought up democracy because we did a little bit of research before we had this conversation, and we have some statistics from some recent studies. In a recent study by the Knight Foundation, 91% of Americans believe protecting free speech is an important part of our democracy. So, Council President Glass, my first question is for you. In recent years, we've become more aware of emerging free speech challenges such as online harassment and disinformation campaigns. Does local government have a responsibility to respond to these challenges as the idea of freedom of speech evolves?
So that's a really important question, and it's one that the Supreme Court is grappling with right now. Where, especially online and on social media platforms, can we say no? Can we take a comment down because it is either an outright lie or misinformation? And these are things that we're struggling with. I'll share with you from my perspective. I see a lot of misinformation online, and it's hard to combat it. But what we have to continue doing is making sure that correct information is out there and try to correct people when we can. But that takes an army these days, and it can't not just be done by the elected officials. It takes neighbors calling out other agents of misinformation as well. But with regard to what can local government do, local government can support local media, right, so as a way to combat that misinformation. And that's why MCM is so critically important, and other local news organizations as well.
Well, thank you for that. So I want to turn a little bit to some of the organizations that are doing some of the work and who are involved. So Ari, can you talk to us a little bit about Friends of the Library, Montgomery County, and how your work is important in this space?
Sure. So I'll make a disclaimer that I am not a librarian, and nor do I work for Montgomery County Public Libraries.
Right.
FOLMC, Friends of the Library of Montgomery County, is a privately governed, not-for-profit organization that supports Montgomery County Public Libraries. And our purpose is to fundraise for the public library system for those enhancements above and beyond county dollars, and to cooperate with other library supporters. Speaking to your earlier comment about aligning with like-minded people so that we can make sure that people in this county understand what library resources exist for them, and working with elected officials and decision makers to make sure that our library system is fully funded, and also with creating a vehicle for people to support their libraries charitably. And one of the most important things that libraries does is create those impartial environments where we can come together and speak civilly to each other and have that access to free information. And so one of our roles is to ensure that libraries are relevant spaces where people can go to and see themselves, read about themselves in books, and they have experiences that are very relevant and relate to them.
So recently we've seen lots of challenges to the library system in terms of books that should be carried and voices that should be heard or can be validated within that space. Can you talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on the recent uptick of banning books and the notion that some books should not be available in libraries?
My initial thoughts about that are, aren't we grateful that we live in Montgomery County, where we haven't experienced that as much yet. And so, we're not living in Book Bandville, Florida, or even some of those spaces right here in Maryland that are experiencing those book challenges. And so it's even more critical that Friends of the Library works with our the library board and our elected officials and people in the community who share the just outrage about that, to make sure that we are positioned so that that does not negatively impact our county.
Mike, you work with the Alliance for Community Media and with public education and government stations, papers, radio stations across the country. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with ACM and how it's related to the idea of protecting free speech?
So I work with about 500 organizations around the United States in 42 states. Some of them are municipal organizations, some of them are nonprofits like MCM, others are educational institutions that are operating locally based media, either on cable, online, sometimes they have their own publications online, or they have radio stations. About 60 or so have radio stations as well. All of them act as communication conduits for their community, either so that local residents can understand what's going on with local government, or local residents have the ability to be able to have their story reflected in the media that they share with their neighbors, share with other people in their community, so that the community can understand itself. You'd be surprised at what exists even in our community for people who don't have access to good information.
Many years ago when I visited the museum, I saw in that space that journalism is so important that it is the only field mentioned in the Constitution of the United States, freedom of the press. That's journalism, right? So it's that important that it's the only field that is mentioned in that document, and that it's interesting that our forefathers recognized that so many years ago, that people need that access to information and people need to be able to report on what the government is doing in a free space.
And they did it even before journalism schools existed.
Exactly, right?
And I'll add to that. Right, I went into journalism because I wanted to help, and I wanted to inform, and recognized value in investigative reporting, and covering and shining a light on issues of importance. And so I did that for 12 years, and during that same time, quite frankly, my inception story in politics is as I was walking to the Metro to take the Red Line down to CNN and Union Station in DC, I was trying to cross the street and the sidewalks were crumbling and there was no safe way to get across the street in downtown Silver Spring. And I thought to myself, I know how Congress works, I know how the federal government works, but who do I talk to about fixing sidewalks in my own neighborhood?
Right.
And so from that point on, 15 years later, here I am on the council. But it is a continuation of sharing information, shining a spotlight on aspects of government that are not working, like road repair, and turning that into tangible action. And the difference between journalism and politics is journalism can provide that information, it can shine the light, but then it ultimately is left to the elected officials, and probably more importantly, the community, the residents, to require and request that positive change is made.
Right, and so you have experience from both sides, so being on a journalism side and then being an elected official. So I have a question for you. Sure. What is your recommendation of how we, the public, right, when we have an issue with government and we want to report, hey, this system isn't working, we need roads to be fixed, and they might want to bring some of those contentious issues to your attention or to other elected officials. What is your recommendation on how to maintain civility while addressing hot button issues and controversial topics, but still protecting people's freedom of speech and their freedom to express their discontent or whatever it is they want to say?
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder. Not only multiple Facebook pages, multiple Twitter accounts, Instagrams, and everything else, next door and local listservs. I follow all of those platforms and read all the emails that I get. But sometimes I too need to take a break because some people don't engage in a fair and respectful way, and I understand they're passionate, they want change, they're upset about something. But those of us in elected office are human too, and what I would ask is that you can share something with us and tell us that we need to make some changes, but try to do it in a respectful way. And there is so much heated debate and vitriol out there that we all should check ourselves to make sure we are not contributing to that. And you know, I do take breaks from social media from time to time because sometimes it can get a little too heated.
Yeah. Ari, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it doesn't help that the anonymity of social media brings out the worst in people, I think. You know, how to share your information with elected officials, and make sure you have your data, and speak from a point of, you know, information as opposed to rage, right? And where can you find that data about information?
Easier said than done. You know, people just,
Library.
they hear something,
Right.
they see something, they jump on the phone,
Right.
they jump on the computer, and I call it angry thumbs, because they're just like
Exactly.
on their phone, just kind of going at it without taking the time to do that research or have a conversation. It's just so easy to respond.
And where can you get that data? The library, right? Call your local library to get
Right.
the data that is going to resonate with the elected official, right? Like, what's the information that he or she will need to know in order to make informed decisions?
Right.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that occurs to me is that we've made some aspects of communication super easy, but we've made other aspects of communication extremely difficult. So reflecting why you want to talk to somebody, I often get the sense that pressing send is much easier than understanding why you want to talk to somebody. And understanding that you're having a conversation. You know, conversations are typically two-way. You ask questions, you listen with two ears, you speak with one mouth, right? And I think very often, because the technological means are extremely easy for us to be able to spew, it's very, very hard for us to listen and to reflect. And I think that's extremely important. But then we need to be thinking about like how we are trying to cultivate people's best lives, right? Which is not about sort of the negativity. The thing that, you know, if I was to read emails all day, Evan,
Right.
I would be an extremely negative person. And so, you know,
Forget about the tweets and everything
yeah,
else.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. The X's or whatever we
Right.
call them now. But that's like a mission that we often don't talk about that's extremely important. The weather. Knowing what the weather's like. Knowing what you can expect in sort of the local neighborhood. Community events. Celebrations of people's lives. One of the things I think is sort of fascinating, I've talked to some small town media organizations. The thing they miss when the local newspaper folds is obituaries disappear. So that the commemoration of what people did in their life in locality is gone. Those are all sorts of things that we need to be thinking about as we think about sort of trying to build our public space in this strange environment.
Yeah, and I think the idea that social media can replace everything because it's a space where you can get access to information and freely express yourself is, I think that people believe that that's a thing, right? So they wake up in the morning, I look on my phone, I can get news, I can go to social media, I can see what my friends have been up to for the past day or so. I'm ignoring some of those negative things, even though I feel like on the subconscious level, those are seeds that get implanted and they do affect our mental health and they affect what we think about the world and what we think about our communities as well. So let's talk a little bit about social media and how people are using it as a vehicle for freedom of speech and expression. So let's talk about how we can address the challenges of misinformation and hate speech while remaining an open society. So Council President Glass, is a legislator, how do you manage the many voices and opinions, whether in a public meeting, in public spaces, or social media? How do you manage all of those opinions and voices about your work, and how do you know what to pay attention to?
There's a lot to unpack there. quite frankly, the way I use social media is share with people events that I'm going to or things that I think are important. And so I use it as a way of personally sharing parts of my day while emphasizing the newsworthiness of why I'm attending something or speaking about something. A lot of people will tag me in various things, and sometimes it gets cluttered, which I know younger generations are not a fan of email, but for me, email is the best way of capturing what someone's intention is or what their thoughts are, because everything else kind of gets lost in the ether. And one of the things that I try also not to do is I recognize that you can easily get lost into an endless debate on social media. And I try not to reward bad behavior for people who are just poking and being negative. And it's important to note that even people who are being negative on social media, there is a point of view that they are sharing. And I understand it. And I want to try to make everyone's lives better, but I think there are more productive ways. And so you use the term that I like, angry fingers. I hope that we can all channel that anger and channel our discontent into a different way. And what I'm hoping is that people will be engaging with me in a meaningful way that we together can make the positive change that everybody wants.
Thank you.
So I follow you on social media, of course, and one of the things that I appreciate is your walk the walk style of social media. So you will, for example, celebrate National Take the Bus to Work Day by showing yourself on the bus with your former college roommates, and that is important to me as a constituent to see in an elected official.
Thank you for following.
You're welcome.
So, Ari and Mike, I wanted to ask the both of you, have you experienced misinformation on social media or hate speech or something that you really wanted to respond to just because you felt like it was wrong, and if you actually moved forward in responding? Because Council President Glass mentioned, not rewarding bad behavior, because sometimes we realize that people say things because they want a response. But I'm just wondering, personally, have you had that experience? And if you responded, if you ignored, how do you approach that, considering that if it's my social media and I have the right to say what I want, how do you approach that?
So you mentioned earlier that we share, similar backgrounds and being women of color, and so we're kind of fair game sometimes, right? Just God forbid you can have someone successful who looks like us and has to make hard decisions that don't sometimes align with other people's personal views about the way they think your organization should work. Right. And so I had to think about this for a while.
If it's just something random, I have to ask myself the question of if it's real or not. If it's a robot, I mean, I hate to say this, but like, there's a lot of traffic online is just there to be able to feed outrage. Right? And people just have to understand that. And that part of this is sort of this media literacy question that we have to work on, so that people understand how media is working or doesn't work. I keep that in mind.
Right. So it's really hard for me because I get so emotionally connected and invested in the conversations between people that I care about, and I want to respond, but I do, like Ari, sometimes I just have to disengage and to disconnect, and then find the space to connect to people offline to have that conversation. So we all, I think, understand and acknowledge why inclusion is important and freedom of speech is important. But since I have the three of you here and you guys are experts, I'm going to use you guys as a focus group. So for me, and for Montgomery Community Media, what advice would you have for us on how we can continue to make sure diverse voices are heard in our community? What kind of advice would you give to me, to my team, and other people that are working in this space of what we can do, what we need to do better or more of? We'll start with you, Council President Goss.
So we work really hard at the council and in county government to make sure that everybody's voices are heard. When we have zoning issues and land use issues, we try to go into the communities where those issues, the areas where those issues would most affect, and hear directly from the people in that neighborhood. And when it comes to news and information, I would I encourage you to continue going into those communities. You know, we know that in our community of 1.1 million people, there are areas that are well heard and well represented, and there are others that are disconnected. They might never have heard of Montgomery Community Media. They don't listen to, say, NPR or read the Washington Post or read MoCo 360. And I would encourage you to go into those neighborhoods and find some stories so that they learn about what's happening in their own neighborhood and then start sharing their newfound information or source of information with their neighbors. And that way they'll start seeing what's happening. And whether or not they ever get interested in the issues that we talk about in Rockville, that's secondary. But what we want is neighbors to know their neighbors. That is how we create safe communities. That's how we create caring communities. And that's how we maintain our functioning democracy.
Thank you. Ari?
So apparently a lot of these really highly visible book bans are started by a very small few, right? And like you mentioned earlier, most people actually are in favor of free speech and the ability to access free information. And so my advice would be to establish those strategic partnerships, because there's strength in numbers. If there are more of us, clearly, your ability to help bring visibility to our side of this is so critical. And just to continue to partner with libraries and make sure that your viewership understands what resources are available to them, I think is the best advice I could give.
Thank you.
Take the time to listen to the community. And let those gaps inform decisions you make about where you want to be in the future. You have to be thinking about building a future institution that is enduring and reflects the needs of residents that we know will continue to have information needs. What do those needs look like? Do you have the ability to be able to breathe and listen, and rather than being on sort of the hamster wheel of activity where you're creating things all the time? That's extremely important, and I think that having that ability, that superpower, is vital as we think about the future.
Well, I appreciate that feedback and guidance, and we will take that to heart as we look at ways that we can continue to be supportive of this community for our sustainability for the next 40 years. And I want to thank you all for being here today, and it's time for us to wrap up this important conversation, but this was great. But thank you all for your feedback. Thank you to our panelists for being part of this dynamic discussion on free speech. We've delved into crucial topics, from the evolving role of local government in response to emerging challenges to the vital contributions of community media outlets in facilitating constructive dialogues. We've explored the delicate balance between freedom of expression and maintaining a respectful community, and examining how organizations like Friends of the Library Montgomery County champion access to information. In an era of rapid digital communication, it's imperative that we collectively address the challenges of misinformation and hate speech while preserving the principles of an open society. This demands active participation from all of us, and the initiatives and policies highlighted by our panelists show us that progress is possible. To those seeking to engage in constructive dialogue, remember that respectful listening, empathy, and a commitment to understanding differing viewpoints are keys to progress. Together we can foster an inclusive and respectful community while upholding the principles of free speech. Thank you, Council President Glass, Ari Brooks, and Mike Wassenaar for your insights. And thank you to our audience for joining us in this important conversation. Let's continue to champion free speech and the vibrant exchange of ideas in our community.